The Vigilant Fury, an exploration vessel belonging to the Galactic Empire, was chasing down a stray probe through the wreckage of a drifting meteor. The crew was surprised when they found a cryopod floating in close proximity to the probe. The Fury swept up the pod along with the probe in one perfectly executed maneuver. The Imperial soldiers inside crowded the pod marked Pandora Box 1, eager to see what they had discovered. One look inside the cryopod was enough to send the crew into laughter. "You gotta be kidding me!" one soldier exclaimed. "Is that what I think it is?" "By the stars, I think this might actually be a human," said Commander Elano, barely comprehensible from his laughter. "I thought these silly things all died in their nuclear fallout. We gotta send this back to the CRF. "The CRF? I think this one belongs in a museum, or maybe a zoo," a soldier cracked from behind the commander. Elano finally put an end to all the jokes with a clap. "All right, that's enough fooling around. Set a course to the capital's Central Research Facility. Admiral Corvin is gonna love this." The Vigilant Fury's engines thundered as it broke light speed. The pod eventually made its way to the Imperial capital, where the top scientists took over. In the cold, sterile white labs, the human inside, Sergeant Ryan Carter, was nothing more than a harmless oddity. Heading the project was Dr. Myrin Talor, a striking figure among the Galactians, her long silky black hair shining like polished onyx under the lab lights. Her pink eyes glinted with amusement as she circled the pod, her voice dripping with contempt.
"Look at him,"
she sneered, her sharp claw-like fingers tracing the glass.
"So fragile, so simple. How did they ever survive on their own planet?"
The faint, studded ridges of her nose twitched, as if repulsed by the sight of the human.
"Extinction was inevitable for such a primitive race."
Her team murmured in agreement, their own pointed ears twitching slightly, their long hair flowing around them like silk in the sterile air. Admiral Corvin Velk strolled casually into the room, his imposing presence commanding instant silence. His dark pink eyes flashed with arrogant intensity as he approached the pod, his hands clasped behind. The studded pattern of his nose quivered with amusement. "This is it?" Velk's voice was a low growl, laced with mocking disbelief. He leaned forward, his breath fogging the glass for a moment. "This is the last of the humans, the species that annihilated itself in nuclear fire." He let out a deep, rumbling laugh and turned toward Dr. Talor. "Wake him up. Let's see what this last human has to offer. I'm sure it'll be entertaining." The lab machinery hummed as they prepared to thaw the relic. They expected nothing more than a feeble, pitiable creature. But they were about to wake Sergeant Ryan Carter, and the galaxy would never be the same. The sound of the hissing, decompressed gas filled the white lab as the pod was unsealed. The frost evaporated into the air, revealing the sleeping figure inside. Ryan's preserved body began to stir. His eyes fluttered open, his vision blurry as he looked at the unfamiliar faces surrounding him. For a brief moment, he was trapped between worlds, between the past and the present, till it all came flooding back. Memories of Earth's final days flooded his brain, the blinding light of nuclear detonations, the vivid screams of humans, and the sky green with radiation. The fall of cities, the collapse of human civilization under the weight of its hubris. Ryan was part of Earth's last stand, part of an elite force known as Pandora Unit, designed to survive in the darkest moments of human existence. His mission was to survive, to be the final safeguard, frozen and preserved for the day humanity needed its soldiers again. But this was clearly not Earth. His trained senses screamed at him that something was wrong. The air was too clean, the walls too bright and pristine. Strange alien faces crowded him, their eyes wide with fascination and amusement. A researcher swiftly injected his neck with a nano-translator, one that would allow him to overcome the language barrier. Rayan's head spun, his body weak from the slumber, but his sharp mind intact. He was in enemy territory, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Dr. Taylor observed him from across the room as her team exchanged mocking glances. Rayanne could hear their laughter. He saw through their condescending remarks disguised as academic observations. "He doesn't look so dangerous now, does he?" one researcher remarked as he scribbled something down on his datapad. Admiral Corvin put his hands on his waist, leaning down to take a closer look. "This is what they called a soldier. No wonder they burned their own planet down. Fragile, chaotic creatures." Rayanne slowly sat up. His vision cleared and his mind sharpened. The weight of centuries in cryo pulled on his muscles, but he focused. His unit was trained for all sorts of unexpected situations. His specialty was psychological warfare, not just brute force. Break the mind, and the body will follow. He let them talk. He let them mock him, showing nothing but a seemingly innocent and soft smile as they laughed behind their masks of professionalism. The Galactians spoke freely, dismissing the fact that he could hear every word. Rayanne listened intently to their conversations about the Galactic Empire, about instability on the outer worlds, about growing unrest. They believed they were safe. They thought of him as their new pet, but Rayanne could already see the cracks in their arrogant facade. The researcher monitoring his vitals looked him over once more and chuckled.
"Harmless,"
she muttered. Rayanne's lips curled into a faint, innocent smirk. "You have no idea," he whispered under his breath. His instincts were in control now. Despite the fog of PTSD creeping around the edges of his mind, his training took over. He noted the patterns of the guards' movements, the room's layout, the security protocols, every bit of information he needed to plan his next move. He was not harmless. He was a trained killer, and these fools gave him all the information he needed on a silver platter. You see, Rayanne was no ordinary soldier. Before Earth fell, he led undercover operations behind enemy lines. The Pandora soldiers were master manipulators who specialized in taking down nations from within. He was an agent of anarchy, and he was about to shred their comfortable little lives into pieces. Lieutenant Yana Shal had no idea, but by the time she first laid her dazzling pink eyes on Rayanne, the game had already begun. At first, she was cold and dismissive, just carrying out her duty of keeping the human in line. But Rayanne saw right through her doubt, curiosity, and thirst for approval from her superiors. Rayanne perfectly played the role of the harmless captive. He made sure to appear cooperative, soft-spoken and weak, but with an undercurrent of mystery and humor that Shal found interesting, even a little seductive. After a week of observation and small talk here and there, Rayanne struck. "Lieutenant Shal." Rayanne looked deep into her wide pink eyes as she stood in front of his cell. "I know you're not like the others."
"What do you mean?"
she asked while she slid a strand of her smooth black hair behind her pointy ear. "You're smarter than them," Rayanne continued, his voice soothing, almost hypnotic. "You see things they don't. You know I'm not a threat. I've been nothing but cooperative since I woke up. I could help you if you let me." Shal frowned, but Rayanne could see the doubt in her eyes.
"Help me how?"
"I have knowledge about tactics, about the way soldiers think, the way they break." His smile stretched across his face. "You give me a little space, a little room to stretch my legs, and I'll share some of that knowledge with you. You could use it to move up the ranks, maybe even impress Admiral Velk." Shal hesitated, but her mind was already bending under Rayanne's manipulation. Her pride worked against her, her arrogant ambition pulling her close to the edge. "Just small breaks," Carter said, his voice like a poison seeping into her thoughts. "Let me walk the facility. I'm harmless, remember?" Against her better judgment, she agreed. It began with small walks through the facility's restricted zones. It seemed safe at first. Shal was there watching over him, but Rayanne had no interest in leg stretching. He was already laying the groundwork for his plan. Fights and paranoia broke out soon after. Rayanne used his leisure time spreading doubt and suspicion throughout the facility. He would pass by groups of guards, dropping vague comments, setting them on edge. "Did you hear what Lieutenant Shal said about you?" he whispered to one guard, keeping his voice low, conspiratorial. "She thinks you're slipping up. Might be a promotion in it for someone else if you don't shape up." To another, "You see the way they look at you? They're just waiting for you to screw up." Another soldier he talked to was quite easy. A simple offhand comment while the guard stood watch outside his containment cell. "You hear about the resistance cells in the outer systems? Heard they've infiltrated places like this." It didn't take much for tensions to boil over. Guards accused each other of slacking, backstabbing for promotions, and even accusing some of being resistance spies. It was easy for Rayanne to tear their fragile bonds. The small conflicts turned into fights, verbal, then physical. Rayanne moved stealthily through the chaos, slipping into the off-limits areas. He sabotaged security systems, left sealed doors open, and disabled minor infrastructural functions. Just enough for things to go wrong without drawing attention to himself. At first it was just lights flickering, just a blink here and there, but then entire sections of the facility were pitch black. Panic and confusion spread among the guards and researchers, with every malfunction feeding into the paranoia Rayanne had sown. Lieutenant Shal was unraveling, and Rayanne relished in it. The once overconfident officer paced outside his cell, biting her sharp claws like nails and pulling on her silky hair. She was overwhelmed by the tension, but couldn't identify its source. She thought that the only new variable was this harmless human. Overcome with her suspicion, she finally decided to confront Rayanne, who at this point she considered a friend.
"What's happening here?" she demanded. "These fights, these malfunctions. Is it you?"
Rayanne couldn't hide his amusement as he leaned back against the wall and gave her a chilling, twisted smile. "It's not what you see that kills you," he said softly, his voice dripping with malice. "It's what you don't see. It's what's already in your head." Shal's breath lagged. For a moment, her mask of confidence slipped, and Rayanne could see the raw fear behind it. "You let me walk," he said, his eyes glued to hers as he approached her. He slipped his veiny hand through the bars, his finger pushing back that ever-dangling strand of hair of hers behind her ear. "You let me talk, and now look around. Everything's falling apart. All I had to do was open the door, and chaos strolled right in." Shal stumbled back in fear. She couldn't deny it any longer. He wasn't a harmless pet. He was chaos reincarnated, someone who didn't need to lift a finger to tear everything apart. The Empire had found Pandora's box, and in their ignorance, they opened it.
"You're dead,"
Shal said, a mix of anger and anguish.
"I'll have you executed by morning."
"No, you're not," Rayanne chuckled. "This is all your fault. So, unless you want to be executed alongside me, you're not gonna say a single thing." Shal couldn't argue with his logic. She was doomed, but Rayanne extended a lifeline to her. "I like you, Shal, so I'll tell you how to get out of this pickle. Lucky for you, you've accumulated quite the number of vacation days. Take a week off starting tomorrow. I'll delay getting out of here for a couple of days. You won't be blamed for this." Shal was silent, struggling to make sense of her helplessness.
"Okay,"
she muttered as she turned to leave. "Oh, and assign Private Callus to guard me in your place. I like that guy," Rayanne said playfully as Shal stormed off, grinding her teeth. Rayanne couldn't get out on his own. He needed an inside agent, and that poor soul was Callus. He was a low-ranking guard, already cracking under the paranoia and pressure that Rayanne fed him. Rayanne had been working him over carefully, sowing doubts about his fellow guards, whispering to him in moments of tension, turning him against everyone. 2 days later, in the middle of the silent night, Callus approached the cell, his face pale, eyes darting nervously around him. He looked like he was trapped in a nightmare with no escape.
"You were right,"
Callus whispered, looking over his shoulder.
"They're planning to get rid of me. They think I'm the problem, but I know it's them."
Rayanne leaned towards him, his voice calming, almost seductive.
"Of course it's them, Callus. They've been turning against you from the start. You can't wait till they get rid of you."
Callus' hands shook as he tapped on the control panel to unlock the door. His mind was swaying on the edge, his sanity already half gone.
"You'll help me, right? You'll make sure they don't get to me?"
Callus desperately asked. Carter smiled, the darkness in his eyes disguised with sympathy.
"I'll help you, but you have to help me first."
Callus nodded as he unlocked the door. Rayanne casually walked out looking at the guard, who now looked at him with a mix of fear and hope.
"Let's get out of here,"
Rayanne said, his voice laced with malice. They both made their way through the facility. Rayanne took advantage of every moment, using Callus's keycard to bypass security and sabotage critical infrastructure. He further manipulated Callus into disabling parts of the power grid, causing blackouts that threw the facility into chaos. Among their way, they planted small devices, tools that were crafted from stolen equipment. The devices would explode, crippling the facility, but not before he was long gone. Rayanne's escape was almost done when something unexpected happened. As they neared the outer exit of the building, they encountered an unknown group. Rayanne quickly realized that they were not Imperial soldiers. Their movement and mannerisms were different. Those weren't guards, they were fighters. The leader of the group approached him, his eyes sharp and calculating. Commander Derek Voss.
"You're him,"
Voss said, studying Rayanne.
"The human, the one they've been keeping locked up."
Rayanne's eyes narrowed.
"Who the hell are you?"
Voss smiled faintly.
"Resistance. We've been watching this place for a while now, waiting for the right moment. Seems like you've given us one."
Rayanne could see the weariness in Voss's face, the strain of a long and exhausting fight against the Empire. But there was still a fire in those pink eyes of his.
"You're not the first to try and take them down,"
Rayanne said, his voice cold.
"But if you think guerrilla tactics alone are enough, you're wrong. They'll crush you."
Voss nodded.
"Maybe, but we've been destabilizing their outer systems for years. We've been a thorn in their side, but we don't have the resources to deal a killing blow. I think you can help us with that."
Rayanne stared at Voss, intrigued but skeptical.
"Why me?"
Voss stepped closer, his voice quiet but intense.
"Because you're something different. We've been fighting this war for years, but you have the ability to tear them apart from the inside. They think they're invincible, but you've shown us that they're not."
The Empire was the kind of arrogant, oppressive force that exploited the weak, the same as the ones he blamed for Earth's downfall. He hated them for it. He hated everything they stood for.
"They're weak,"
Rayanne said, his voice filled with grim certainty.
"They just don't know it yet. I'll help you, but we do it my way. I don't want to fight. I want to break them."
Voss nodded. He recognized the hatred in Rayanne's eyes. He could see that he was not a mere soldier, but a weapon designed to bring down empires. Voss had spies on the inside, and was completely aware of Rayanne's capabilities.
"We'll follow your lead,"
Voss said.
"But we need to move quickly. The Empire is getting restless, and it won't be long before they catch on to what's happening here."
Rayanne turned to Callus, who stood nervously by the exit, unsure of what to do next.
"You want to survive this?"
Rayanne asked him. Callus nodded quickly.
"Then disappear," Rayanne said, "before they realize you're the one who let me out."
Callus stumbled away, running back into the facility. A sudden blast shot came from behind him. His brains splattered on the clean white floor. Rayanne had taken a blaster from Voss's holster and casually took his shot.
"I really like that guy,"
Rayanne said as he walked to the exit. The sound of distant alarms and explosions echoed through the air. The group left the facility behind. Rayanne had planted enough chaos to keep the Empire occupied for a while, but it wouldn't last long. The Empire would respond brutally and swiftly, but they had a real fight on their hands now. Voss glanced at Rayanne as they moved toward the Resistance safe house.
"What's the plan?"
Voss asked. Rayanne's smirk returned, cold and vile.
"We make them think they're losing control. Then we make them lose everything."
The war against the Empire was about to change, and Rayanne Carter, with his twisted, anarchistic methods, was the key to bringing it all down. Rayanne stood before the Resistance fighters. Some faces were skeptical, others were eager. He had shown them how to strike, not with force, but precision. He explained how they were going to incite anarchy, how they'll turn fear into a deadly weapon. He thrived in the tense energy around him, in the growing sense of impending catastrophe. For Rayanne, this was more than a revolution. It was art. A beautiful, twisted game where only he knew the rules. He stepped forward, his voice calm and chilling.
"You want to crush those bastards under your feet? You don't go after their machines and ships. You go after them, their minds, their spirits. That's where our war lies."
His eyes glowed under the dim yellow light of the room as he leaned on the table in front of him. Voss stood beside him, watching intently.
"They think they're invincible because they have technology, but that's their weakness. Their systems, their protocols, they don't adapt. And once they stop trusting those systems, they stop trusting each other."
Voss nodded, but still cautious.
"You talk about tearing them apart from within, but how do we know it'll work?"
Rayanne's ever-present smirk widened, sharp and cold.
"Because fear is the most infectious disease, and those who wield great power are most affected by it. They have too much to lose."
The plan was already in motion. The Resistance started spreading the poison of paranoia that bloomed into wide-scale distrust. The once disciplined and loyal soldiers now viewed each other with suspicion, spreading rumors of infiltration. At an Imperial base, Rayanne and Zara Tyler, the Resistance second-in-command, disguised themselves, planting falsified Imperial documents, suggesting that several high-ranking officers were secretly aiding the Resistance. They planted the documents in a way that seemed like a careless mistake, as if it were an accidental leak. By morning, the base was in chaos. The paranoia within the Empire festered. The scenes played out just as Rayanne envisioned. The military believed that their ranks had been infiltrated. Every little malfunction, every miscommunication was viewed as conspiracy. He was everywhere and nowhere. The Galactians couldn't figure out who was responsible for all this, so they turned on each other. At another outpost, paranoia escalated into a full-on skirmish. Two officers, both convinced the other was a spy, drew their weapons on each other. Shots were fired, and within seconds, the soldiers joined in, forming alliances and massacring each other. Rayanne and Zara watched from a distance, hidden in the shadows of chaos. She shook her head in disbelief as she watched the soldiers self-destruct.
"I've never seen anything like this,"
Zara muttered.
"We fought them for years, and I've never seen them break like this."
Rayanne's smile was eerie, predatory.
"Fear is stronger than any weapon. Once you plant it, it spreads. And once it takes root, they'll do the damage themselves."
Zara glanced at him, a sense of unease creeping into her voice.
"You enjoy this, don't you?"
Rayanne's eyes shone in the low light.
"Oh, absolutely, my dear Zara. They remind me of some humans that I really hate. The thought of bathing myself in their blood makes my brain tremble with excitement."
Zara couldn't think of any way to respond to that horrifying statement, so she stayed silent. A newfound fear of humans grew inside her. What a terrifying species. She was almost relieved that they were extinct. Back at the research facility, Dr. Myron Talor had been obsessed with understanding Rayanne since his escape. She only thought of him as an amusing curiosity when he first arrived, but now, as disorder spread throughout the Empire, she realized the truth. In the darkness of her lab, she frantically searched through the ancient military records of Earth. She finally was able to pull some of the classified files, dated right before Earth's demise. The Pandora unit, trained in mental warfare, they didn't fight with guns and bombs. Their purpose was to bring down enemy nations through manipulation and unorthodox tactics. Her hands shook as she read about their methods that mirrored everything happening within the Empire.
This isn't just a human,
She whispered to herself, her eyes widening.
he's a weapon, a relic designed to tear us apart from the inside.
Her heart raced as she pieced together the puzzle. The man they had laughed at, the man they had seen as nothing more than a weak survivor of a long-dead world, was systematically dismantling their empire, and they had woken him up. She rushed to Admiral Velk's office, bursting in without even a knock.
Admiral, you need to listen to me. Rayanne Carter, he's not just some relic from Earth. He's part of a unit designed for psychological warfare. He's using us against ourselves.
Velk's eyes met her with irritation.
And what do you suggest we do? Kill him?
She shook her head.
It's too late for that. He's already in their heads. If we don't act fast, there won't be an empire left to defend.
Velk scoffed.
You're panicking, Doctor. A few soldiers turning on each other doesn't mean the empire is falling.
Talor's voice hardened.
That's exactly what it means.
Rayanne's tactics only got worse. They used falsified communications, sabotaged supply chains, and planted evidence of internal betrayal. The Galactians distrusted everyone at that point. Command structures broke down as commanders were accused of treason. Entire battalions fell into disarray, unable to function. Admiral Velk desperately ordered mass crackdowns. Soldiers were imprisoned, interrogated, some even executed without trial. But that fear-driven response only fueled the notion that the Empire was collapsing. Rayanne and Zara continued to lead raids and covert operations, taking advantage of the chaotic command structure. They used the Empire's technological superiority against them, feeding false data into their systems, sending drones and automated defenses into disarray. By the time the Empire realized they were under attack, it was already too late. Zara, watching as one of the Empire's outposts erupted into flames, turned to Carter.
We've been fighting them for years, and in just a few weeks you've broken them.
Rayanne's eyes were cold, his smile predatory.
This was inevitable. All empires fall under the weight of their own hubris. I'm painfully aware of that.
The Empire was falling, and Rayanne Carter, the last human soldier, reveled in the destruction. The Imperial capital was restless under the blood-red sky. It was supposed to be untouchable, a symbol of the Empire's control. But now it was in disarray before a single shot was fired. Now Rayanne was ready for the final act. The capital's streets were turned into a war zone, but the real battle was inside the Imperial fleet. Admiral Velk raged inside his command center, his eyes jumping from one screen to another. Reports of sabotage, conflicting orders, and friendly fire filled the space waves. Soldiers were turning on each other, entire divisions abandoning their posts.
Fire on Sector 7,
Velk barked, pointing at a map that displayed what he believed to be a fortified resistance stronghold. The fleet above the city fired, and destruction rained down. But the sector was empty. Explosions ripped through their own infrastructure. "It's a trap!" An officer's voice yelled through the communicator, but it was already too late. Velk's face flared with fury, his mind refusing to accept that one man, one puny human, was responsible for the chaos unraveling his empire.
"Find him!"
Velk roared.
"Find Rayanne and bring me his head!"
Meanwhile, Rayan traveled through the city unnoticed. He used the confusion to slip past patrols and defenses. The Galactians were led into a game of smoke and mirrors. They could no longer tell friend from foe. Rayan's communicator buzzed as he approached the Central Command building. Zara's voice came through, filled with satisfaction.
The fleet's in complete disarray. They're shooting at their own ships now. We're ready when you are.
Keep them busy, Rayan replied. I'll handle Velk.
Rayan easily slipped inside the building. The guards had no idea their defenses were already useless. He was a shadow in the heart of their most secure facility. Rayan stepped inside the command chamber, the door sliding shut behind him. Velk, preoccupied with his screens and reports, didn't notice the intrusion. Rayan moved silently, his eyes locked on Velk, the man who had ordered his awakening, who had mocked him, who had failed to understand what he had unleashed on his world.
You've lost,
Rayan said, his voice echoing in the chamber. Velk spun around, his eyes wild with rage.
You!
He reached for a plasma pistol on his desk, firing a shot without hesitation. But Carter was faster. He rolled to the side, the blast barely missing him.
You think you can take my empire from me?
Velk shouted, firing again.
One man can't destroy an empire.
Rayan moved like a wild beast, covering behind a console and circling around Velk.
I don't need to destroy it, he said. I just needed to show the world that you can bleed.
Velk fired again, but this time Rayan rolled forward, knocking the weapon from Velk's hand with a single brutal strike. Velk stumbled back, shock and fury evident in his eyes. He wasn't facing a harmless pet. He was facing the product of humanity's darkest days. Rayan closed in as Velk swung his giant arms, trying to land a punch. Rayan was too quick for him. He slipped inside his guard and drove his elbow into the ribs. Velk gasped and stumbled back in pain.
I can't hear you laughing now,
Rayan said, his voice dripping with malice. Velk threw another punch in frustration, but Rayan easily dodged. Velk was used to commanding armies and controlling fleets, but here, in brutal hand-to-hand combat, he was outclassed. Rayan dragged Velk across the floor, slamming him against the wall. Velk struggled, trying to break free, but Carter's grip was unbreakable. He leaned in close, his voice like a cold icicle stabbing through Velk's ears.
You thought we were gone. You thought humanity was extinct, but we were waiting, and now you'll be the first to fall.
Rayan took out a blade, flicked it in the air, grabbed it, and drove it into the Admiral's neck. Velk groaned as his limp body fell to the floor. Rayan twisted the knife, his eyes glued to Velk's anguished eyes as it lost the light of life. Rayan wiped the bloodied blade as he walked away.
I really don't like that guy.
By the time Rayan exited the command center, the city was already in flames, the Resistance in control of key points across the capital, and the Imperial forces in full retreat. Zara ran up to Rayan, her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and unease.
It's over, isn't it?
Rayan glanced at her, his expression hard to read.
For Velk, yes, but there's still work to be done. The Empire isn't just a man, it's a system. We've weakened it, but it's not dead yet.
Zara nodded.
And what about you? What will you do now?
I still have something important to do,
Rayan replied. As the Resistance secured the central communication hub, Rayan purposely walked through the corridors. His job was not done yet. This was never about the Empire. It was about humanity. Inside the hub's control room, Zara led the final steps of establishing control. The main servers were still intact, and the Resistance worked quickly to ensure that the Empire's remaining systems were neutralized. She looked up at Rayan's grim face as he entered.
It's done,
Zara said, her voice tired but relieved.
The capital is ours. The Empire's fleets are scattered.
Rayan nodded, looking around the room.
Good, but we're not finished yet.
Zara wiped the sweat from her forehead.
What do you mean? Velk's dead. Their command center's in ruins. What's left?
Rayanne ignored her as he took her place on the main console, bypassing the security protocols with ease. She watched as he pulled out a small metallic device from his pocket, something he had taken from his cryopod.
What's that?
Zara asked, stepping closer. Rayanne placed the device on the console, tapping it twice before it began to glow with a soft, pulsating light. He looked up at Zara, his expression finally showing some kind of relief.
The next phase,
he said quietly. The device began to interact with the console, its code spreading across the display. Data spread onto the screen, coordinates and commands that Zara couldn't make sense of. She stared at Rayanne, suspicion creeping into her voice.
What are you doing, Rayanne?
He turned toward her, his face cold, his eyes determined.
I'm carrying out my mission, what we were all meant to do.
Zara took a step back, her hand unconsciously moving toward the weapon at her side.
What the hell are you talking about?
Rayanne's fingers tapped across the console, typing out a series of commands.
You think this was just about taking down the Empire? That was only part of the plan.
Zara's heart pounded in her chest.
Then what was the plan, Rayanne? Tell me.
Rayanne didn't stop working, his voice calm and distant.
You think I was the only one? That Earth put its entire survival on the shoulders of one soldier?
Zara's breath paused, the pieces slowly starting to come together in her mind.
Wait, you're saying there are more of you?
Rayanne smirked, looking over at her.
Thousands.
Zara's heart skipped a beat, the weight of his words sinking in.
Thousands? Like you?
He nodded.
Earth knew it couldn't survive the wars that were coming. Our planet was dying. Our resources were gone, but we had one last weapon. Us. Soldiers trained not just to fight, but to dismantle, destabilize, and rebuild. Before Earth fell, they sent us into the stars, scattered across the galaxy.
Zara's face paled as she realized the magnitude of what he was saying.
So, you were meant to wake up, do this, and then what? Rebuild humanity?
Rayanne finally stopped typing and took a step closer to Zara. His dark eyes glued to hers with intensity.
Exactly. I was the first. My job was to find the weak point in the galaxy, break it, and call the others here.
Zara's head raced as she tried to make sense of it all.
The others, are they like you?
Rayanne chuckled.
They're worse.
Zara stepped back, watching in stunned silence as the console flashed with confirmation of the signal. A transmission had been sent, a beacon stretching out into the far corners of space. It was calling them.
I don't understand.
Zara mumbled her words, shaking her head.
So, this was the plan all along? You were never meant to fight alone?
No, he said quietly. We were never alone. Earth's final plan wasn't just about survival. It was about revival. We were meant to wake up, find the broken pieces of the galaxy, and use it for our purpose. I was just the first.
Zara could only watch as the signal stretched out across the stars.
So now what? The galaxy is going to face thousands of you, soldiers trained to break entire systems?
Rayanne's lips curled into a smile, his eyes still fixed on the stars.
Exactly. We were built for this. The Empire was just the first step.
Zara stared at him, unease eating at her.
What if the galaxy doesn't want to be used by humans?
Rayanne's smile faded, and his voice took on that familiar, cold tone.
It doesn't matter what the galaxy wants. This isn't about them. It's about us. Humanity's coming back, and nothing is going to stop that.